Comics.
Boneless Comics Podcast.
Boneless Comics Podcast.
Because they have a bone.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. We like comics because they have no bones, even though fish do have bones, and so do people. So I guess bones are okay as long as the comic itself isn't made of bones. Anyway, my name is Joe Getcho.
And I'm Mike White. And if you're feeling like a fish out of water when you read Aquaman, then we're here to help you. Also, this is a clean comic book podcast where we discuss and review comics by DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, IDW, and more. You can find us on social media at Boneless Comics 1 on Twitter and at Boneless Comics Podcast pretty much everywhere else.
And swim on over to our website at bonelesscomicspodcast.com, where you can get more information about the podcast, links to places to listen to previous episodes, an Amazon store where you can buy your own copy of the comics we reviewed, and a link for our YouTube channel where you can watch video episodes and find additional fun bonus content.
Yes, and today we're going to be discussing Aquaman Underworld, which collects Aquaman number 25 through 30, and also Justice League number 24. Published in 2018 by DC Comics and written by Dan Abnett and penciled by Stjepan Šejić. And I believe I'm saying that correctly, but if anybody out there is from Croatia, you can correct me.
Well, I'm pretty much sure we're saying Dan Abnett correctly. So
I think we got that one.
He is an English comic book writer and novelist who's been writing since the 1980s. So another one where he's done a lot of work. So some of the highlights that I found interesting are that he's worked for Marvel Comics and Marvel UK on titles such as Doctor Who, The Real Ghostbusters, James Bond Jr., apparently, Star Trek Early Voyages, Nova, which is one of Mike's favorite characters along with Aquaman, and Guardians of the Galaxy, which the movies are based. And then, of course, he's written for DC Comics on both Aquaman and also Titans for the DC Rebirth branding, as well as Superman and Batman. He's also written a ton of stories for a weekly British science fiction-oriented comic magazine called 2000 AD, which apparently includes Judge Dredd, who first appeared in the second issue in 1977, and Abnett wrote in the 1990s. I didn't realize that character had been around in comics so long.
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously he's a lot bigger deal in the UK than he is here.
Yeah. Outside of comics, he's written dozens of novels in the Warhammer universe and several for both Star Trek Voyager and Torchwood, which is a spin-off of Doctor Who. He's contributed his writing to many video games as well, such as Shadow of Mordor, Alien Isolation, Terminator Genesis, and Warhammer 40,000, as well as a screenplay for Ultramarines, which was a British adult computer-animated action science fiction movie in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. So I wonder if he'll be working with Henry Cavill in the future. That'd be kind of neat.
That's definitely the thing that Henry Cavill is doing now. So I actually on just sort of a side note about that, I was reading an article recently that apparently the reason that they finally came out with the interview for why he's done with The Witcher, and he was so relentlessly devoted to the source material that he was antagonistic to the entire writing team of the show, apparently. Wow. So I guess that's what happened, that he quit. But he's definitely a big nerd, and he's really passionate about all those things that he gets involved in. So hopefully that'll be good for him. Anyway, the penciler today is Stjepan Šejić, and he is a Croatian artist living in the city of Crikvenica, where he lives with his wife, who is also an artist, Linda Šejić. And while he initially planned to become a lawyer, he got early work painting as a colorist for Tyler Kirkham. So if anybody's been reading DC in the last, 10, 20 years, Kirkham has done a lot of work there. He's become a big name and has kind of transitioned from being an interior artist to just a cover artist, because he can make money off just doing that now. So Kirkham is a big deal and was before Šejić broke into the industry. So though Šejić was mainly inspired by comics from Italy, he was introduced to the Western comic book industry through Top Cow's Witchblade, which he eventually worked on for longer than any other single artist. His style is very polished and can include either digital or traditional painting, meaning he does his own colors and doesn't require an inker. So he's known for drawing all of his figures, male and female, as overly attractive, sensationalized versions of themselves. So basically, The best way to describe it is every single character looks like a supermodel, male and female. I mean, that's how he draws. So it's very recognizable whenever you see it. Most of his early career is at Top Cow, Mark Silvestri's imprint that publishes through Image Comics. His higher profile work has been on the aforementioned Witchblade, Aphrodite 9, and Sunstone, which is his creator owned adult erotica comic book series, which has been running since 2011.
I'm sure that has
Apparently.
supermodels in it as
No.
well.
Yes, I believe it does. So, in more mainstream comics, Šejić has primarily worked for DC, with an acclaimed run on Aquaman, followed by Suicide Squad, and then regular penciling duties on Justice League Odyssey. And unfortunately, due to miscommunication, likely due to the language barrier, Šejić was forced to completely scrap the first two issues of Justice League Odyssey and redraw them, delaying the
Wow.
release of the title 2 months. Yeah, that was, I remember when it came out at the time because DC was pushing a big initiative to have like multiple Justice League titles. And so Justice League Dark had been out of publication for a while and they brought it back. They restarted Justice League, the main book, at #1. And then Justice League Odyssey was going to be like the space-based superhero team. And it missed that release window of that other stuff coming out by a pretty big margin. So
Yikes.
unfortunately, I think with language barriers, those things happen. But
Yeah.
his most recent work for DC was Harleen, which he wrote and drew, which reimagines Harley Quinn's origin story with equal parts trashy romance novel and advanced psychology. So in 2020, he actually announced that he was leaving the mainstream comic book industry to pursue his creator-owned projects full-time. However, he continues to do covers for various series at DC, Marvel, Dynamite, and Top Cow.
Interesting. All right. So getting into Aquaman here. So Arthur Curry, aka Aquaman, was created by Paul Norris and Mort Weisinger and debuted in More Fun Comics number 73 in 1941. And if you're wondering, Marvel's Namor, the Submariner, came out just 2 years prior in 1939. So technically he was first, even though he didn't make his movie debut until way after Aquaman did.
Yeah.
During the Silver Age of comics in the late 50s and 60s, Aquaman was a founding member of the Justice League. In 1964, he became one of the first superheroes to get married when he wed the undersea queen Mera, even beating Reed Richards and Sue Storm to the punch. And we can't have a conversation about Aquaman without mentioning the 1970s American animated series Super Friends, where he was portrayed as a joke character that couldn't contribute anything beyond an ability to ride fish around like jet skis. This has sparked numerous spoofs and parodies, which make Aquaman the butt of many, many, many jokes. But truly, Aquaman is a noble and actually very powerful character, and he became a lot edgier in the 1990s to sort of compensate for his poor portrayal in the media. His origin and even identity have been revised several times over the decades, but essentially he's the son of a lighthouse keeper, Tom Curry, in Atlanta, a water-breathing outcast from the lost underwater city of Atlantis. Due to his heritage, Aquaman discovered as a youth that he possessed various superhuman abilities, including the powers of surviving underwater, communication with sea life, and tremendous swimming prowess. Eventually, Arthur decided to use his talents to become the defender of the Earth's oceans. And if you want a deep dive on Aquaman history, make sure you check out our after show after the show, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
So today's story, King Arthur Curry, the Aquaman, is presumed dead, and his throne has been taken by Coram Wrath, a man who has weaponized Atlantis' xenophobia into a means for him to grab power. Using forbidden magic and a hatred of both the surface world and taint bloods, or Atlanteans with fish-like characteristics, Wrath is set on making Atlantis greater than it has ever been, and nothing will stop him from crushing his opposition under his heel. But rumors spread of a vigilante helping those in need in the slums of Atlantis, a man named Orin, who bears a striking resemblance to Aquaman. Along with his new ally, Dolphin, one of the very taint bloods that Wrath hates, rumors of civil war begin to stir. Allies begin to appear from Atlantis from without and within, as General Merc, feeling guilty for helping to oust Arthur, murders the mob boss Crush to keep the knowledge that Aquaman lives from the new king. Meanwhile, Lady Mera refuses to believe Arthur is dead, and after finding no help with the Justice League, seeks out Tempest from the Titans, also written by Dan Abnett at this time. Looking for a magical solution to King Rath's crown of thorns, the magical barrier cutting off Atlantis from the outside world, the former Aqualad and Mera fight to re-enter the city. Unfortunately, while Mera succeeds in re-entering Atlantis, the amulet she used to override Rath's magic is damaged, and she loses the ability to breathe underwater. And so our story ends with Aquaman readying a small army to retake the kingdom, unaware of the peril his beloved is facing. And that is to say, this is definitely a slice out of a much, much bigger storyline. Dan Abnett's stories are organized into 6-issue mini arcs, but really it's kind of one almost 50-issue long run. So this is really my attempt at finding a story that I could kind of cut out of that and then look at as an isolated incident. So with all that said, everybody, we'll be right back after this break.
My father was a lighthouse keeper. My mother was a queen. They made me what I am. Permission to come aboard?
Welcome back, everybody. So the story that we're covering today is critically acclaimed for its art, and actually this is the only piece of Dan Abnett's run that they've republished in a hardcover deluxe edition. Did you feel like the art enhanced the story for this one?
I really did. Like I like the art. I like the sort of realism to it, and the facial expressions. Like they were really emotive in all the different like panels of things that were happening, and I felt like it really brought everything together, especially with all the like bubbles in the background of every panel. It's like you're looking at, you know, a story that you could see somewhere else, but it's all underwater. And so there's fish people, and there's shark people, and there's ones that look like people, there's ones that look more fish than people, and then there's, you know, bubbles and water and everything. So it was really cool to, you know, get immersed in not just the water, but in the world of Aquaman. So I think it...
Are you I'm sorry, are you going to make water puns for this whole episode?
What are you talking about? Of course I am. What are you mean?
So I was aware of Šejić before this run, but he was only kind of on the peripheral of stuff that I had read. But I really feel like this is a good fit for Aquaman because of basically everything you just said. It makes the world feel like it's a living, breathing place that exists. And I actually have a confession to make. I think that one of the reasons I like Aquaman, and it's one of my favorite comics at DC, is because they've had like just a long string of like 10 out of 10 pencilers on the book. Whoever they've got, it needs to be somebody that can convey motion really well.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I notice in Šejić's art a lot is you will see flowing cloth and hair and things like that. And the sort of expressiveness of that under the water, I think, is something that you really need to sell that we are underwater, because you don't just want to draw everybody like they would look if they were, you know, standing on a street corner or something like that. So yeah, I think it really does a good job. And I think that all the characters look very unique and they're identifiable as who they are as well. So like Dolphin's face doesn't look the same as Mera's, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, he really looked like the kind of, I wouldn't say traditional Aquaman necessarily, but the Aquaman that I'm more familiar with, where he's got like the, you know, gold armor top and then the green fish pants or whatever they're called. And then he's got the belt buckle that's got like his symbol on it. And so, yeah, very recognizable, which is funny because in the story, he was trying to not be recognized. So it seemed kind of weird to me that he was just, I'm just going to wear, you know, it's like Batman. So Batman says, hey, I don't want to be recognized, so I'm going to let people see me in my Batman outfit. Like, well, yeah, everybody knows what Batman looks like. So same thing with Aquaman. So if you're trying to hide, you know, at least wear, like, the typical thing to do is to wear a cloak and then have, you know, a hood over your head to sort of conceal your identity. But he didn't. He's just like, here I am in my shiny armor. It's kind of funny.
So one interesting thing about that, and I think this story actually highlights it, is that he's not really known as Aquaman to the people of Atlantis. That's his superhero identity. And so the surfacers are like, oh, Aquaman. And that's what they know him as. the people underwater know him as the king, and specifically in this story as the king that was a little too progressive for them and was trying to kind of combine their society with the surface world, and the people were not really a fan. In fact, it was so politically volatile during his reign that they're the ones that put Koramrath in power in the first place. So this was very much not like a coup or anything like that. It was more like a legal, taking over, transfer of power in the kingdom, and which of course is why, he kind of is where he's at the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
What you are missing context wise, and we can talk about context a little bit more because I obviously have a lot more than you, is that Merc had been the one to Commander Merc, who's the commander of the Drift, and they're basically like the spec ops for the Atlantean military. That's what they are. He was commanded to go kill Arthur once Wrath became king, and so Merc did kind of a shoddy job. He did attack him. There was a pretty serious fight, and then he left him for dead, but he didn't confirm the kill. And so a big story point in this story is actually him kind of feeling guilty for his actions there once they realize that Wrath is a maniac and is, doing all kinds of crazy stuff as their ruler. But I guess my question to you is, were you able to follow this? Because there's a lot of terminology and there's a lot of supporting cast that at this point in the arc, Abnett is going to assume that you already know who they are.
So there was enough for me, but I came in with, having obviously seen the movie, so having that familiarity with some of the characters. Commander Merc was in there, although he looked like he was crazy, and I don't know, he was going after Mara a couple times. He's kind of, I don't think he spoke at all. He just like looked really crazy. I know who Garth is because of, he's Aqualad and things like that. And Volko, although, I was picturing Willem Dafoe, so it was hard for me because this Volko is drawn very differently. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's got to get used to that. So having that context of at least the movie and understanding the basics about Aquaman, I found this very easy to follow because they give you enough of, even the part about, Aquaman being the king that they sort of rejected. There's enough in there that it's not subtle where you can miss it. They do sort of explain because they, the dolphin character wants him to reclaim the throne, and he has a conversation, and I use that in water quotes, not air quotes, because water quotes were underwater.
Yeah, well, you're underwater, so
exactly.
We can all see that.
So he doesn't want to be king because they rejected him. So he kind of explains that a little bit. So I thought there was enough in here that they wove in to kind of let us know where are we at, what's going on. Okay, this is post, he took over the kingship, it didn't work out, and now he's kind of hiding in the streets, again, water quotes, the waterways as a vigilante in the sort of underground areas of the society. And it was really cool to see kind of those areas of Atlantis. Like usually you just get the special effect shots of like, there's this giant massive city underwater and it's super cool. And then we focus on like the action or the fighting, and that can happen anywhere underwater. But this was really neat to see like an actual society and see, all the vast different like areas and, breakdowns of the upper class and the lower class and all of that stuff. Was really cool to see, from Aquaman's perspective and, from actually seeing the underwater city.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I think generally speaking in the comics, Atlantis feels more like it is just one city in a massive, kingdom that takes place all over the planet, because there are other cities. Garth famously is from like, I think Idleshire or something like that. Where he was born with purple eyes and outcast because of that. Like he wasn't accepted because of how he looked. And there are other cities, especially during Peter David's run, he really did a lot to like expand out like, and there's this city and there's this kingdom and they don't all get along. And I think the movie actually tiptoed into that a little bit with showing different kingdoms, but they didn't really convey a sense of there being like different classes in their
Yeah.
society. So that's the thing that's really interesting about this story, where you're with the ninth tribe or whatever, which are kind of
Mhm.
like the poverty stricken people, or the people that have like genetic mutations that make them more like creatures that would live underwater.
Yeah.
So
It was similar in Wakanda Forever when they showed Namor and their version of Atlantis, where it was really just we got some shots of, okay, there's a large city, and then we see some kids playing, and
mhm,
we see just kind of like normal stuff that you would see, except, again, they're underwater people. So
right.
that was another where it's like, okay, here's a little snippet, but we're really not here to talk about that. So we're going to focus on,
Mhm.
the story, the drama, the action. So again, for the comic version, it was so nice to, dive into the deep end to
Yeah.
discover, what was going on in Atlantis.
Yeah. There also are a lot of supporting characters that I'm guessing you hadn't heard of besides like Merc and Volko.
Hmm.
Like Tula. I mean, I guess, have you seen Garth on, was he on Titans maybe?
Yeah.
Um
Yeah, he gets killed by
all
Deathstroke at the end of
oh,
the first season.
fantastic. Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah, of
great.
course.
Um
That's Aqualad. We don't need him. We'll just flush him.
and then there's also Jurok Biss, who is the king's keeper of monsters. So I guess my question is just, did any of those characters stand out to you as being like really different from the movie, or did you look at any of them and be like, oh, I'd like to learn more about that one, or anything
I
like that?
I like that Volko kind of had more to do, because like in the
Mm-hmm.
movie he was Aquaman's like mentor, and trained him how to fight, and then he was a vizier to the king, but he was just an advisor, so he kind of just like he had a
Right.
role, but it was very, very typical, kind of stereotypical. Whereas in this, it was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
he's like looking at these artifacts, and he knows the history of Atlantis, and so he's
Mm-hmm.
able to, get into a lot of areas and be really useful because of his sort of knowledge of like the far-reaching history. So it was neat to see him, do something to sort of stand on his own rather than just be like a side character. And like a lot of these, I felt like they were very developed in their own right versus
Mm-hmm.
just being supplementary characters to, the Aquaman story.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to bring up about Volko obviously is, the movie version is Willem Dafoe, and he's very like svelte and like thin and fit and everything, and that's
Yeah.
basically the opposite of how Volko is always portrayed in the comics. He's always kind of like an overweight politician. I mean, that's kind of how you see him, and he and Arthur don't always see eye to eye. Like, he can be kind of a problem at times and kind of like a know-it-all, and so it was perfect in this story for him to be the guy that was going like the secret way through Atlantis's history to, find Aquaman's trident. And it was cool to see him, definitely, like, he's talking to all these undead kings of Atlantis, and what they're like, as long as you recognize them and can say their name, they won't attack you. And then he starts
Yeah.
getting to some that are like so rotted that he can't tell who they
Can't
are.
recognize them. I love that part. Like, because all these like ghost like figures come at him, and he's like, as long as you like speak their name, then they won't attack you. And it
Mm-hmm.
was it was like a really cool concept, and then it was really awesome to see like on the page, and then have him go through. And then the person that he's with is like, well, what happens if you don't recognize someone? And he's like, well, then we're dead. Like, there's no, denying it here. So hopefully we'll see how my, history knowledge pans out. And he names like a whole bunch of them, like 5 to 10
Oh
of
yeah.
them, and he's on a roll. And then we switch back and forth to the action, and we come back, and yeah, that's when you get the like rotten one where he's like, I know who all these people are, but I can't see their face. And so he just starts spitting out name after name. He's like, are you this person? Are you this person? And then finally he spits one out that the figure, that's who it is. And then they stop, and that
Mm-hmm.
one can actually talk, which was really kind of strange, but it furthered the plot along because it was
it
helpful.
was it was interesting. Again, these are elements that you don't see in a lot of superhero stories, where this
Hmm.
is clearly a fantasy book. We've got,
Yeah.
giant monsters underwater. We have undead kings that Volko is communicating with, and magical artifacts. Mira needs a magical artifact to get back into Atlantis because it's sealed off. I mean, all of those things. I think it's really good that they include that, because that is kind of what sets the Aquaman title apart and makes it not just another superhero book.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I really enjoyed that part. And I mean, yeah, maybe it's a little convenient that one king was like, "Oh, Volko, I remember you. You talked to me a long time ago," and then they had this conversation. And
that was strange
you
because I
know,
was like, well, how actually old is Volko? And this, like, old figure king something or other that had been dead for, I thought he said like eons or something. And that I kind of lost track
yeah,
of the timing of how he knew Volko and that kind of thing. And then he lets them go. Like he's like, well, I'm bored, because I'm a ghost and there's nothing to do down here and I haven't conversed with anyone. And then he converses with them and helps them find the trident. And then he's like, okay, and he wishes them on their way. Like, I was waiting for that moment of like, well, you can't leave. Like, I need somebody to talk
right.
to. So I'm not letting you leave because I want to talk to you and I'm bored and you can die here with me and we can be ghosts and talk to each other. But that didn't happen. He was just like, all right, cheers.
That would have been a really interesting complication to introduce to the story.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that, but I wish I had, because that would have been really cool. That said, I was just looking at my trades just a minute ago. There are actually 2 more trades within the Aquaman title that continue this story after the 6 issues we read. And then there's also Mara's 6-issue miniseries that is also part of the continuance of this story. So I think Abnett just kind of had to keep it moving because he had so much narrative to get through. So that makes sense to me, but I do get that they could have they definitely could have fleshed that out more. And I don't know, it was just fun.
Would have been interesting.
So one of the supporting cast I didn't bring up because I want to focus on her for a second is Dolphin. And so she is a fan favorite character that had not really been in comics for years. She was introduced during Peter David's 90s run and was basically there for, I don't know, like 75 issues or something like that. So she was a big part of the Aquaman title for a long time. And so these are sort of leading questions because I know what the previous version of her was like, but how did you feel about her being mute and also her bioluminescent powers?
It was interesting that it was like her hair, like she had long hair and it was her hair that was bioluminescent. And then she had to sort of recharge it, which helps to serve as a plot device. So that way she just doesn't like wipe out every enemy they come in contact with. But I guess makes sense in a biology aspect as well. I'm not sure, but if you're a biologist, please let us know on Twitter at Boneless Comics 1. But anyway, so it was interesting with her being mute, and obviously it sort of gave Aquaman a chance to, he had to figure out what was going on, and then he was trying to figure out what it was that she was after, as far as trying to help him return to the throne, which is not what he wanted. But I kind of wondered, I was like, well, okay, her name is Dolphin, and when she uses this power, sometimes she was drawn where she had like scaly arms, and I don't know if her legs were too, but they were green. And then sometimes she didn't. She looked like human, basically. So, I mean, in the story leading up to this, we have all this stuff about like mutations, and the ones who are mutated kind of stick to the slum areas, and the highborns don't want to have anything to do with them. So it didn't seem like it came out of left field, but I kind of wondered, I was like, okay, so Aquaman can communicate with sea life, and not that she's sea life because she's an intelligent person, but I kind of wondered if there was going to be some sort of connection that they would form, as far as maybe he couldn't read her mind, or because he can't read fish's mind, it's more like instinctual. I need you to go here, I need you to swarm there. And I just wondered if there was going to be some communication that they would have, or she would learn how to communicate with him somehow, even though she's mute and couldn't communicate with anyone else. But they didn't go that direction, and I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't have, but that was sort of what I was expecting when I was reading it, was that eventually they were going to have some sort of telepathic communication that no one else had, and that was going to be her unique aspect as a character. But no, she was mute the whole time, and Arthur kept trying to guess, like, well, are you wanting this? Do you want to go there? What's going on? But her facial expressions made it work. Like the art really reflected, he would say something and she would have this face where she's like, no, that's not it. And so he'd go, okay, well, is it this? And then she would smile and he'd be like, oh, okay, that must be, I got the reaction for this. So that must be what what you're after. So that was really neat
Mhm.
to see the art, be able to reflect that and have that communication, which I don't think a lot of
Yeah.
artists can necessarily do, because some of the facial expressions, they all look the same, or you get that open mouth like, "Rah!" and I can't tell if you're smiling or crying or frowning. So that was really neat to see.
Well, I think especially coming off of Blade last time,
Yeah.
where we really had trouble with the expressions and the art. I think it's really nice to go into something where their faces are communicating very well what the characters are feeling. So,
Mhm.
and comics being a visual medium, that's just important. I mean,
Yeah.
that's as important as a director capturing the actor's reaction on camera or something like that.
Mhm.
You need a lot of the visual cues to be able to pick up things that are not said out loud in the story. So, interestingly, I have kind of a split opinion on Dolphin because when I first read this story, I didn't have any backlog reading that was prior to New 52 on Aquaman. So I'd read everything up to this point. I was like, oh, she's a cool new character. I like the bioluminescent powers. The telepathy thing didn't occur to me, but I think again that would have been a really good story idea to put in here where maybe he could communicate with her,
Yeah. On some
more than
level.
most people because he has that limited telepathy. So
Right.
that would have been a really good direction to go. Um, Unfortunately, when I went back and read Peter David's run, Dolphin is foul mouthed and loud and like speaks her
Really.
mind and is just like a force of nature of a character. Like she is not to be ignored. You're gonna listen when she says something. So making her mute is kind of the exact opposite of the way she was portrayed in the previous
Wow.
continuity. So I really like her powers because that was not something that she had before. She really didn't have like a thing. She was just kind of like a tag along character with Aquaman for his adventures in the
Hmm.
90s, but her personality is like completely totally different. So
Wow.
I don't know how I feel about it now
So it's kind of
because
like what they did to Deadpool in X-Men Origins Wolverine,
it's
where
it's
he was
maybe
a
not
foul mouth.
quite that bad.
Okay, but I mean,
But yeah,
like
but I know what you're
when
saying. Yeah.
Wolverine's like, "Hey, they finally shut you up, Wade," and so they sewed his mouth shut, and so
Yeah.
you're taking a character that does all of this like vocal activity, let's call it that,
Yeah.
and now they can't talk at all. So I guess that's what happened to Dolphin. That's kind of weird. I don't know if I would have liked that or not.
Yeah. Yeah, so like imagine like the character of Kaine in Nier, but take out most of the swearing, but
Uh,
kind of that attitude, that's kind of
mhm.
the attitude that Dolphin has in the older books. So
Hmm.
so yeah, I think that a lot of longtime readers are a little bit split on her portrayal here because it
Yeah,
works really
makes
well for
sense.
this story, but it's so different from what came before.
That would have been
So
funny though if the telepathy would have worked and all of a sudden like he can hear her voice and she's just like swearing left and right, like, whoa,
oh my
turn
gosh,
the
that would have been
telepathy off.
awesome. That would have been awesome. That see, you're making me just creatively think about the story possibilities that they could have done here
Mhm.
and really there's so much more that they could have done with her character.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I was talking about this with actually one of our listeners a couple days ago that Aquaman's supporting cast is actually too large. You
Hmm.
can't There are so many supporting characters within the Aquaman world that you can't write them all into a story and have them all have something meaningful to
You
do
drown
because
the story.
exactly, you'd get drowned in it. So unfortunately, I think she's one of those characters that Abnett brought her in because he needed her for a specific purpose and also to be kind of like a, hey fans, look, we're including her in the new
Mm.
continuity, but then she's not really very involved after this story. I think Kelly Sue DeConnick might use her briefly, but this is really her big, display. This and like the next, few issues are really the
I
big
wonder if they give her a
appearance of
reason
her.
for being mute later, like maybe something happened to her to where, it caused that. If it's supposed to be like in continuity or if they just, retcon the character.
I don't remember. Because this is after, the new 52 reboot. I mean, it's
Hmm.
obviously just here's a new version of the character,
Yeah, true.
basically. I don't know if there's any explanation later on of like why she's mute. I don't remember one, but it's been a while since I've read this run. So I guess on the topic of strong female characters. We also have Mara, who has sort of a side mission going on in this story. And it begins in Justice League number 24, where she absolutely trashes the entire Justice League single-handedly while she's trying to get into the Kingdom of Atlantis. So I know that there are a lot of DC fans out there that do not like this issue for that reason, because what she puts a skin of water between the Green Lantern's rings to like rip them off so that they can't make constructs. She sucks all the moisture out of Barry so that he can't run fast enough to do anything. She puts Superman and Wonder Woman in some sort of like hard water bubble that's suspended above the ground, and Batman is like not even remotely a threat to her. So I guess my question is, how did you feel about them dialing up her power this much in the story?
It's kind of like the Scarlet Witch thing where, you know, because we have something that we're trying to do, we're playing up the powers of that character. And then consequently, what happens, you have another character that they downplay the powers because, you know, we don't want them to just get rid of our story and then there's nothing to tell. So it's another one of those where it's like, okay, we know that you're overinflating the powers because you have something that you're trying to tell here. Because how many characters have we, or how many stories have we had where there's some character who trashes the Justice League? That seems like that's just one of those things where it's like, we want to prove this character is powerful, so we're going to make them trash the Justice League. Well, then how are we supposed to take the Justice League seriously if our own heroes, like if Batman has a secret weapon that he can take anyone out on the Justice League, and, you know, Superman really could take the whole Justice League, and, you know, everybody can defeat the Justice League, then it's like, why do we have the Justice League? What good are they? Because everyone can defeat them. Like Granny in a wheelchair over here can defeat the Justice League. Like, okay, then what's their purpose? So it's a little much.
I think that it's a little much, but what I do accept at the very least is that she would be able to defeat Batman because he doesn't know anything about her. Because she actually brings up the point that, like, you guys don't know me. I don't interact with you. I'm not on your team. And she really doesn't. Like, Mara doesn't interact with non-Atlantean characters very much. So this was a big deal because it is sort of her stepping out into the superhero world a little bit more. And in fact, she joins the team proper at the end of this book. And for the next several issues of Justice League, which was written by Brian Hitch at the time, Mara was actually the stand-in for Aquaman instead, because he was trapped in, you know, inside Atlantis and he couldn't get out. So it's a cool setup to get them there. And I buy that she could beat Batman, because I don't really know what he could do to her unless if he had prep time. But they're just like, there's this giant tidal wave. Somebody's like pulling back all of the oceans in order to get into Atlantis, and we've got to stop it because she's like flooding the whole eastern seaboard or something. And so that's why they show up not knowing really what they're getting into. I think where it gets iffy is with Clark and Diana. I don't see her being on the same power level as a Superman or Wonder Woman. So
well, I think that's
even though they're in the water.
I think that's an age-old debate too, is like, you know, if you put Superman in the water, is he as super as, you know, Aquaman? And I think that's been like a long-standing kind of question. But I will say, like, it's really cool. Like, Mara's powers are really cool, and it's really neat to see the creative uses for them, because there were some times where I was kind of wondering about Aquaman, like, you know, he's fighting against these mutants. They fight this like guy who can create like coral constructs, basically, and there's all this magic, which really shocked me that we would have magic in Atlantis. Like, it surprised me, but then as we kept going, I was like, well, it makes sense. It's not forced, and it's really cool, but I didn't expect it. But anyway, so Aquaman's going up against all these threats, and I'm kind of like, okay, dude, you know, you're a big brawny dude, and you're strong and you know how to fight, but at some point you're going to come up against some mutant who has a super powered edge over you, and what are you going to do? You're not going to be able to punch your way through a coral construct that's like strangling you. So at least Mara, you know, she has more of a chance because she can do a lot more with her powers, whereas, you know, again, it seems like Aquaman is like just kind of like a Superman brawler, but he actually knows how to fight.
Yeah, I have long felt like her powers are more interesting than his. And I think the way that they find ways to make his powers useful and interesting, and that's kind of part of the narrative challenge of writing Aquaman in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, is finding ways to make that cool or interesting. There have been stories like older Justice League stories where he and Jean Jones would cooperate on some kind of telepathic problem because they both can,
Yeah.
have some form of limited telepathy. So it's not, depending on the writer, it's not always limited just to sea life. But I think the understanding is that it's easier for him to communicate with them because he's more akin to those life forms.
Sure. So what you're saying is sometimes they try out new ideas and they test the waters to see if it will work for
Yes.
Aquaman.
Yes. Oh, I did want to say, as far as the Green Lanterns, the fact that the two Green Lanterns that she goes up against are the two rookies made it acceptable to me. If it was Hal Jordan, if it was John Stewart, those guys, I would be like, no way. Their concentration breaks enough that she can pull the ring off. But it's Simon and Jessica at this point in continuity had only been Green Lanterns for like, I don't know, maybe like 10, 20 issues of Justice League or something like that. So they were pretty new. And the whole point of them being on the League was they were sort of trying them out and, showing them how to be a superhero. So I do buy that she could take them down at least.
Well,
but
and it makes it difficult too with them because like if you have a weakness like that where their rings can be broken or separated, then that makes it a little easier because it's like they have all of these, crazy powers with their constructs, but all you have to do is slip the ring off their finger and now they're just, regular people and you can kill them easily. People. So it makes them too easily defeatable, I think, if their rings are either fragile or they can, separate them. I guess what they were going for was that because of what Mara can do, she's the only one who'd be able to do something like that. But it still seems like it might be a stretch.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, honestly, this is something that Dan Abnett does specifically with this character. He actually wrote a short Aquaman arc after Peter David had left the book in either the late 90s or early 2000s. And he very much had an agenda to dial Mara's power levels up during that. And then that's very much on display throughout this entire run as well. I think he really likes that character. And I think that's just a tendency that this writer specifically has, with Mara. So yeah, I don't know. I'm a little mixed on it. Overall, I like it because I think we get the conversation of her talking to the League about how she's like, so basically all this time Arthur's been king and we haven't been able to be together because of various reasons of politics and all these things. And I was kind of hoping once he wasn't king that we would just, leave Atlantis and put all the politics behind us and not have to deal with that. And then we could get married and, do whatever we want. But instead he's trapped inside this city and there's like a dictator in charge. And so she just kind of lost it and was like, she thought that she'd finally gotten to this moment in her life that she was trying to get to. And now it's like taken away from her. So I did think it was good that they gave her some agency in the story and like a reason to be as involved as she was beyond just like, I have to rescue my boyfriend. It was more like, well, I have these goals for myself in the future. And like, I've been waiting and waiting and waiting. And now it's been taken away from me and I'm just done. So
all she had to do was find an alternate reality where, there's an Arthur Curry who is without his Mara and go to that one and then kill that Mara and take over and make it more complicated than it needs to be. So,
what's really funny about what you just said?
Please tell me.
In the 90s, after the murder of Aqua Baby, Mara kind of goes insane. Yeah, that's what they called him Aqua Baby. He didn't have a name for a while. I think it was Arthur Jr. eventually, or AJ. AJ might be a different character. Anyway, Mara goes insane at that point in the comics and leaves Arthur, gets captured by this guy in another dimension called Dimension Aqua that looks like Aquaman and has a child with him, believing that that's actually Aquaman. So if you think Aquaman was due for a reboot before the new 52, like, yeah, it was definitely time. Like, they'd done a lot of weird stuff.
Wow.
But yeah, that's actually something. She went to another reality and found somebody that looked like Aquaman and had a child with him. That's
That's
absolutely something that
crazy.
happened in comics. I know you were referencing Multiverse of Madness, but that's totally part of Aquaman
Wow.
history.
Hey, it's
So
comics, stuff
I
happens in
know.
comics.
So basically, we've been talking about three stories here. One with Arthur and the Hodaline, or the bottom feeders of the Ninth Tribe. One with Mira in her quest to return to the kingdom, and one with the political machinations at Atlantis with Volko and King Wrath. Did you feel like all the story elements kind of got their due, or if there was too much time spent with one or the other necessarily?
I thought there was a good balance of all of them, and it didn't feel too choppy to where I think we had a few complaints in the Blade story where we would get a flashback that was conveniently exactly what was happening now, and it would like add some more backstory, and it just felt a little jagged. Whereas this, I felt like it
Mm-hmm.
was easy to follow what was going on, and we had the kind of typical scene change where we've got something going on and a conversation, and it comes to a natural conclusion, and then we switch to an action scene somewhere else, and then we switch to another action scene, and
Mm-hmm.
each story element seemed to kind of get enough time that it was able to breathe even underwater. And I think that that worked. Although one thing though is I call them the Hadolin, and I don't know which is
Oh, okay.
correct because we don't
Hadaline.
hear that.
Hadaline.
And yeah, Hadolin sounds like Elvish to me, but maybe things in
It does.
Atlantis have a little kind of extra pronunciation to them. I don't know.
I don't know. I was thinking of sort of an aristocrat calling somebody, like, oh, you're a Hadaline. You're one of those bottom feeder. I don't know. Maybe
Almost
maybe
sounds
I was putting a
Klingon.
little. Maybe I was
Hadolin!
putting Hadaline.
Hadolin!
Maybe I was putting a little affectation on it for no reason there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think I would agree with you. I think Abnett has a really good sense of story structure, and this is actually something that sometimes you can find in Star Trek that they don't do it particularly well. In like a bad episode, you may have like a B plot that you don't really care for, that you feel like is eating up way too much time. Like in this one, we're going to focus fully half of the episode on Alexander not doing well in school, on the Enterprise, like that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I don't think any of the plots in this felt like padding. They all felt like they were kind of moving towards the same end goal, and they were all furthering the story along. So yeah, I think I would agree with you there. Another thing that I was looking online, and a lot of people have described this run, specifically this part, and kind of moving forward, as Game of Thrones underwater. I have not watched Game of Thrones, so I don't know how that pans out, but I'm assuming that they mean like all the politics and the backdoor dealings with like Volko, and the sisterhood, or like paying somebody off to let him out of jail and all that kind of stuff. Did that come across to you at all, or was that not really something that you noticed?
I might start some controversy here, so please let us know on social media. But
Oh, okay.
I didn't really like Game of Thrones, and
Yeah, that's fair.
I like this. Like I didn't really feel like there was political commentary in the sense of it was like reflective directly of things that are going on
Yeah.
in current events and things like that. It was more of the trope of like we have the sort of upper class and then we have the lower
Hmm.
class, and there's this clear separation, and anyone who's an outcast mutant looks more like a fish than a person gets shuffled off to
Hmm.
the lower parts of Atlantis toward the seafloor, and the aristocrats and that sort of thing and the king are in their kind of separate area. But I didn't really feel like it was like political controversy or
Okay.
debate or
Yeah.
which side do you take. This isn't a story that you read that you're
Right.
like, well, I'm kind of on the king's side because magic is really helpful for protecting Atlantis, and this Aquaman guy stirring up trouble. Nobody's going to side with him. So
Right.
there wasn't any like different alternate viewpoints or anything in here that would
Yeah.
make you feel one way or another about it. So I yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I actually was thinking about it more in line with and again, I'm gonna bring up Star Trek again because that's what we do. but more in line with Deep Space Nine, where you have a lot of different factions that all have their own agendas and things that they want to see happen. Like the Bajorans have a specific desire for how they want things to go, and the Cardassians do, and the Klingons do. And it feels like to me in Atlantis, there are, like, you don't see it so much in this story, but like Zebel is very much its own kingdom with its own agenda that does not align with Atlantis and doesn't really want anything to do with them. And then, you in this story, you have kind of the people of the Ninth Pride who are like, it wasn't amazing under the previous king, but it's gotten a lot worse under the new one. And so, we're not thrilled with the direction things are going. And they're the people that have kind of been left behind, and they're trying to figure out how to move forward. And then you've got the Sisterhood, which they're almost like the British Parliament, I guess, is the best way to explain them. They're sort of conniving political factions within the kingdom that are always pushing and pulling against each other, like right underneath the king. And I don't think a king can be appointed without their approval. So they helped put Wrath where he is. But then during this story, they start to realize that he's a maniac. And so they free Volko. And they're sort of moving the pieces to ultimately, I mean, spoilers for where this is going, but they're ultimately going to put Mara in power.
Yeah. They do mention that in the story as well. So
yeah, I couldn't remember if they did or not. What's interesting is that as the politics of the kingdom play out, there is never a convenient time for Arthur and Mara to get married, though, because the people still don't accept Arthur. So if they get married, he's king again, and they don't want him as king. So once she is elected queen, it's like the wedding is off again. So that's another, like, yet another complication in that whole story. So I do see, sort of the parallel with things like DS9, where they're kind of showing different things moving behind the scenes and how that affects
different
who's in power
factions,
and stuff like that.
things like that.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting to me that Aquaman, having him as a street level vigilante was kind of neat to see, because, that's the like typical superhero thing, but also he was removed from being king. And it's interesting. We can talk about the movie and the after show, but I did want to bring up that, in the movie, they're sort of forcing him to be king because that they need to, have somebody else in power. But it's like, this guy is not really, he's not suited to be a king. He doesn't really want to be a king. He doesn't know anything about leading a kingdom. And to force him into that kind of situation seems like a recipe for disaster. And it's kind of, cool to see essentially in this comic that, like, well, yeah, it really is. And it didn't work out. And the people hated him. And, you can fight, maybe he's like a better general or war hero or, something like that. But as far as like a king, plus, to be honest, it's probably boring from a storytelling perspective we have the superhero who's a king and he sits on a throne all day and listens to people gripe about, border disputes. Like, we want to see him get out there and kick butt, but he's not going to kick butt if he's sitting on a throne. So
yeah, that's the thing too. And I think it makes it easier as a writer to pull him out of the throne room. And so that it's been something over the years where he'll get the kingship back, or then he'll lose it, or then, and that's a cycle that they go through, kind of like with Fantastic Four. It's like, we need a sales bump, so we're going to break up the team, and then we'll get another sales bump whenever they come back together. It's like that thing with, like, oh, Aquaman lost the kingdom, oh, now he's getting it back, that kind of a thing. But what I like about this story is that it's justified within his character, because while he's talking to Dolphin, he's kind of like, look, I didn't want to do this, but I did my best and everybody hated me, and I can't go back there. Like, even if I defeat Coram Wrath and, remove him, I don't have a plan after that. Like, there's no end game that ends with me ruling over the kingdom again. And so they did have kind of that same moment that they have in the movie where they're like, well, what can I be if I'm not a king? And she's like, she draws like the Superman logo with her bioluminescence and the Wonder Woman logo. And he's like, are you saying I should just be a superhero and like just protect people? And she was basically like, yeah, like, why don't you just do that? Like, that's what you're good at anyway.
We need that.
So yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I like that, and it really struck me rewatching the movie how much the ending of the movie undercuts that character point,
Hmm.
because in the movie it's a big deal that they're like, oh, what could be greater than a king? A hero. And then he comes out in his Aquaman outfit and he does all the crazy Aquaman stuff, but then they make him the king anyway at the end. So it's like, okay, well, what were you guys talking about earlier then? So I like that in this story they do stick to it, and it's actually, um I don't think he gets the kingship back all the way through the end of this volume of Aquaman. I mean, I believe even after Mera marries him, which is way towards the end of Kelly Sue DeConnick's run, I don't think he has political power after that. So he's still kind of like, it's like he might be like a figurehead, but like she's really in charge kind of thing. And
Yeah.
she has a lot more of a temper than he does, and she is less, I guess, less progressive than him. She doesn't want them to, like, necessarily, like, we don't need an embassy at the United Nations. We don't need to interact with the surface dwellers, but we also don't need to murder them all. So like Aquaman is pushing for like, let's all integrate with them, and the people are like, we don't want that. So Mera is a little bit more of like a halfway point between like Ocean Master, who is like, let's kill all of them, and
Yeah.
Aquaman, who's like, let's live alongside them. She's a little bit more in the middle politically, so that it's
Hmm.
kind of more convenient to put her in charge. But yeah, I don't know, just reading this story really struck me how, like, yeah, it makes sense for him not to want to rule, and I don't know that I care for the movie forcing him into that position. I mean, it's in the last 5 minutes, so maybe we'll see in the next movie that it doesn't work out.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
maybe.
where they're going to go with it. But
Well, and
um,
that's what I like about the comic, is it sort of like answers that question, because it, in that
mhm.
last 5 minutes in the movie, all the people are like rejoicing because, we've got like the true king. It's like that, the
Right.
story where, he's not just a king because Ocean Master, sucks and, is oppressive,
Hmm.
and he's basically the bad guy. And so we're just like, okay, anybody who takes over for him, we're just glad to not have him. We don't care who takes the throne. So,
Right.
but he gets the scepter, and it's like he's the true king that they've, I guess, been waiting
Right.
for, according
Hmm.
to prophecy, and so on. But at the
Hmm.
same time, like, it just seemed kind of weird that everybody just started laying down their arms and accepting him, because it's like, okay, is this the type of
Yeah.
kingdom where if you swim in and you kill the king, you get to keep what you kill and now you're the king?
Yeah.
Because, like, and all the people are going to accept this. So it was neat to see the more like diversity
Hmm.
in the comic, where it's like some people are not really happy about him taking the throne, and some people
Yeah.
don't really care about the, making peace with the surface world. Like, I don't care if we're at
Hmm.
peace or war or whatever, leave them on their own, keep them away
Yeah.
from us.
Yeah.
And it's really neat to see like an expansive underwater world, because I did a little
Hmm.
bit of undersea diving, and I think the
Oh.
world record for scuba diving is like maybe 1,000 feet, and
Oh my gosh.
the average like depth of the average ocean is like 13,000 feet, and the deepest ocean is 33,000 feet. And so we're talking like, even at 75 feet, there's a
Hmm.
lot of pressure that, builds up underwater, that pushes against your body, like as a, a human
Right.
body. So, once you start getting down to like 100, 200 feet, I mean, it's like pretty intense. And you have to worry about like your body actually holds air in it, like your inner ear. And so you have to,
Hmm.
equilibrate that outside pressure and inside pressure. And so as humans, it's really difficult for us to go deep underwater. So
Hmm.
these, people in this underwater society, they have an amazing physiology to be able to survive, not only, at hundreds of feet or even thousands of feet, but at like tens of thousands of feet. And so,
Yeah.
there's so much ocean on this world. There's way more than there is land. So it makes sense that there
Right.
would be like a ton of different factions with different agendas, and they would actually be
Hmm.
more populous than, the surface dwellers. So if there ever was a
Right.
war between, the underwater kingdoms and the surface world, you're talking like, 10,000 to 1. They would have the grand army, and,
Yeah.
there'd just be more of them. So
Yeah. It would be bad. And as you mentioned, they also use magic. That is a pretty prevalent
Yes,
element in
that was really neat
Aquaman
too.
comics. So yeah, was there anything else you wanted to address before we move on to final thoughts? Or
Now I think we're ready to take the dive to final thoughts.
all right,
Comic
Boneless Comic Podcast.
Boneless Comic Podcast.
Because they have no bones.
yeah, welcome back, everybody. So this story for me is maybe a 4.5 for me, because this is really a high point in Dan Abnett's run. And again, having been reading these characters for like 24 issues before this arc, and then seeing them come to this point and really bring Aquaman's character somewhere different, where he's decided, like, you know what, I don't need to be running the show. I don't need to rule the people. I can actually just protect them. And that doesn't have to be the way that I protect them. I really like that evolution for his character. And any of the negative aspects would really be just nitpicky things, like this iteration of Dolphin isn't really what I'm used to. So, that would probably bump it down a little bit for me if I was really getting technical. But I don't think there's anything in it that's wrong, really. And structurally, like we talked about with the 3 plots, I think they all get enough time to breathe. It also feels nicely like it's just a part of the DC universe. Like it's kind of its own universe that exists under the ocean, but it does feel connected to the world at large, because we do see the Justice League. We do see actually the current then Titans team at one point. And so you see how these characters interact with the DC world while also being kind of separate. So I like it. I mean, I think this is one where they knocked it out of the park. It's not quite what I would consider a 5, because I don't think it had the emotional hook that I would need for that, maybe. But on like a character and story level, it's really satisfying to me. So 4.5 for me.
So I did not have the context that you did coming into this. All I had was the Aquaman movie, which I did watch again recently, so it was kind of fresh on my mind, but also kind of the sort of general pop culture knowledge of Aquaman, the corny jokes aside, him being a character that is actually powerful kind of in the like underwater arena. And this comic really just blew it out of the water for me. Like the character, I don't know that the character was necessarily more complex, but the world was more complex. And sort of my favorite stories are ones where the world is very defined and complex, and there's a lot of stuff going on as far as like the world building goes. So like stories like Harry Potter, for instance. So like there's this magical world, and it's all like kind of set up, and there are rules sort of for things, and everything has a name, and it feels like a very real world that you could almost, step into. And like Lord of the Rings, and especially like with Rings of Power that came out on Amazon recently, it feels like this really special world that's kind of its own thing. And I really got that from this, just this one trade of like, this is its own thing. And it's really cool because it's underwater. So it can be whatever they want it to be. There's not really any rules because it's separate from everything that we know. So it could really, it could really exist, like really, really exist, because we don't know 30,000 feet below the sea level. So it was really neat. So there's not really, I don't really have any complaints. I still want to hold out that 5 out of 5 for a perfect story where I'm like, I just love this is great. This isn't quite there for me, but it was really good. It's really enjoyable, and I want to know what happens next. Like I want to, like, once we're done with this, I want to read the rest of what happens, and especially because it's kind of like a cliffhanger at the end of the trade. It's like everything came together, we're ready, set to overthrow the king, and to be continued. No, I want to know
that's the
happens.
end.
So I'm going to go with a 4.5 as well. Context was not something that ruined it for me. Not knowing anything again, but basic Aquaman facts. I got into it. I enjoyed it, and it was a nice, ride. So 4 out of 5. For
awesome.
both.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us under the sea for this episode of We Like Comics Because They Have No Bones. Go ahead and tell us what you thought of this comic.
It's better under the sea. Sorry.
After Joe's solo is over, Tell us
Yes.
what you thought of this comic by posting on social media at Boneless Comics 1 on Twitter and at Boneless Comics Podcast pretty much everywhere else. Be sure to use our hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast.
Please use the hashtag. So if you liked
Yes.
getting into the underworld of Aquaman in Aquaman Underworld, you can add it to your collection by visiting our Amazon store at bonelesscomicspodcast.com. You can also pick up and read ahead in preparation for our next episode. We're going to jump into our Marvel Comics time capsule to discuss Avengers Annual number 10, published in 1981 with pencils by Michael Golden, and the Cry Vengeance story from Marvel Superheroes number 11, published in 1992 with pencils by Mike Vosberg, and both written by Chris Claremont.
Oh, very cool. And don't forget to check our YouTube channel for the after show where we'll discuss all things Aquaman. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.